Today, the Lean to the Left podcast takes a look at a 2016 murder in Florida, one that ripped away the life of a young man whose mistake was to celebrate a possible new job and then mistake somebody else's apartment for his own. Since then, this young man's father has been seeking justice, but in Ron DeSantis Florida, that is not to be found. With us today is Sandy Modell, and he's here to tell the story about what happened to his son, Ryan, how he came to be shot and killed, and his fight for justice in an area of Florida famous for political corruption. It's a tragic story, and we're pleased to have Sandy with us today to tell us about it. Welcome, Sandy, to the Lean to the Left podcast.
Good afternoon, Bob. Thank you for having me on the show. I appreciate it.
I'm delighted to have you, and I'm sorry it's a sad story, but I have to give you credit, man. You've been fighting this fight, trying to seek justice for your son, and that's to your credit. Can you start at the beginning and tell us a little bit about what happened and why it was that Ryan tried to enter an apartment that wasn't his own?
Yeah, he lived in that complex with his girlfriend. And the problem, and the buildings are known for that, they're monolithic. They're not well lit, and they all look the same. They're just very large and bland. And as a result, people frequently mistake one building for the next. So that wasn't unusual. He left the party. He and some friends were celebrating somebody else's birthday, and Ryan had just gotten a new job, and it was now far too late. It was probably 1:30, 2 in the morning. They were at the pool. He went home, and he went to the correct unit, but one building over. That's all.
It was
That's
one
where it
building
started.
over. It was the same number, right, as his?
The unit number was the same number,
Yeah.
whether it was 1A or 1B, but the building was one building off.
It was one building off, but it was one of these complexes where, as I read in your book, where the buildings were all identical.
Yeah.
They all looked
On the
alike.
square.
And hey, you're coming home from a little celebration, you're feeling a little bit good, and you just go up to the wrong door. You try to get in, and what happened?
The owner came down and told him, "You're at the wrong place." Now,
Yeah.
supposedly, there was an altercation. I've really got no proof of that. The only person that says it is the murderer, and there's no corroboration on that. But let's just say there was some sort of discussion at the door.
Yeah.
He opened it. He talked to my son. My son had his foot in there. The guy slammed the door on my son's foot.
Okay.
I don't know what happened there, but my son woke him up at 2 in the morning. So that's fine. I don't have an issue with anything that took place there. Then my son left. The occupants notified the police, and they said it's just a kid that's drunk. They knew it wasn't a burglary, and they knew it wasn't an invasion, or there wasn't anything. They told the police, just a drunk kid. And the cops said, "Stay inside. You're behind a locked door, so just stay inside, and we're on our way." Instead, under oath, this guy testified that he waited about 4 or 5 minutes, got his gun, and went back outside. Now, I don't know how familiar you are with stand your ground, but stand your ground has to be a continuous sort of thing. In other words, the new law, it's basically self-defense on steroids. You don't have to retreat. You can just stay right where you are, but it has to be at the time. You can't fear something right now and then come back tomorrow and take action.
Okay, so stand your ground is a state law in Florida that allows someone who feels threatened to shoot somebody. Is that pretty much it?
It does, and we could debate the law. It's just I have no interest in the law. The truth of the matter is it doesn't apply in this case. We could also debate vehicular homicide, but not here.
Yeah.
It's just not a stand your ground case. I say that with the benefit of experts like Mark O'Mara, stand your ground expert, Ben Crump. They've both represented me. Former prosecutors, a former state attorney, experienced journalists. Everybody that's looked at this says this is clearly a murder case. Stand your ground doesn't apply. The event was over and the guy was safe and there was nothing to fear. Instead, he went outside looking for my son. That's pursuit. You can't stand your ground over there. You can stand your ground here. But if you're looking to go over there, that's pursuit. That's a whole different thing. He found him and then pointed a gun at my son, was seated on the ground with a hose. He was 100 yards from this guy's house. He was in a neighbor's yard using a hose to wash the blood off his foot from when he'd gotten slammed in the door. So he's on the ground washing his foot, facing in the other direction. This guy finds him, again, 100 yards from his own, starts yelling and confronting him while pointing a gun at him. And as my son stands up and walks to him, that's when he felt threatened and had to use.
That's when he shot him.
Yeah. Now the gun, just so you know, the police were stunned at this. The gun is a 10 millimeter equipped with a laser and a flashlight. The police called it a hunting weapon. And this guy told the police, he normally walks around during the day with this gun. And it's a normal neighborhood, just a quiet residential neighborhood. Normally walks around there during the day with that weapon and an extra 5 or 6 clips in his pocket. So you're talking somewhere north of 50 to 60 bullets just walking around during the day.
How is it that this guy hasn't been charged with murder then? I don't understand.
Nobody does. The state attorney, current state attorney, was the chief deputy at the time. And my son had the misfortune to have this occur, additional misfortune to have it occur during an election. She was running for the state attorney position. And what she wanted to do was court the NRA.
What's her name?
Her name is Amira Fox. She's got quite a sketchy past. Chapter 3 covers all of her crimes. It reads more like a rap sheet than a resume. And she was looking for an NRA endorsement. She called it Stand Your Ground. Now, the interesting part is she can't explain it. When the family asks for an explanation, when journalists ask, all the office ever says is they have no comment. They refuse to, she's either unable or unwilling to explain how this could possibly be considered stand your ground.
You've had quite a campaign against Amira Fox, right? You've even put up billboards calling her out.
I did during the election. I thought they were way out of bounds and I supported her opponent. But then she has a heavy bias against me, and that has been made clear to people that have asked her about, have urged her to file charges. And she has responded with things like the father campaigned against me or so on and so forth, which is shocking because the reality is her job is to enforce the law. It's not to like the victim's family. Murder's a murder, whether I'm a supporter or an opponent.
Yeah, that is definitely true.
I think so.
It's one of the problems with political, when you're electing the state's attorney like that, because it's all politics.
I understand the politics behind getting elected, but behind enforcing the law, that's just absurd.
I know, but you're saying that she kind of used this as, in a way, as a campaign thing because she wanted the NRA endorsement. So she catered to them and called this Stand Your Ground and didn't prosecute the guy.
That's correct. The truth is that she obviously this is in Fort Myers. Tallahassee is probably 6 hours away. During her campaign, she was in Tallahassee quite a bit, supposedly on company business or in state business, but she was later fined by the Ethics Commission for campaigning on state time. And one of the things she did whenever she was in Tallahassee was she stopped by and spent time wining and dining the president of the Florida NRA. And with this call for Stand Your Ground, she was able to get their endorsement. And if you look at the voters, she won by, I don't know, close to 10%. She was the endorsed person. She had outraised her opponent by 5 or 6 to 1. She was supposed to win 80-20. The race narrowed down to, when her stuff came out, it narrowed down to about a 55-45, and probably a good 6 to 8% of those 10% were NRA voters. So it really did make the difference in her campaign. Her strategy worked. It's just.
So basically, the case against your son fell victim to this political strategy, I guess you could say.
I think that's exactly what you'd say. But she's never been able to explain it or defend it. And her office has consistently said for years, when everybody asks, just the police ruled it a murder. Everybody else thinks it's a murder.
Wait a minute. The police ruled it a murder, but she won't prosecute even though the police ruled it a murder?
Yeah. The lead detective on it was a lieutenant. He's now been promoted to a captain. Chapter 7 of my book is his testimony that this is a murder. They believe it's a murder. They want it prosecuted. They don't understand what she's talking about.
Yeah, I read that chapter. Now, Rick Scott, now a senator who famously wants to put Social Security and Medicare on the chopping block, was governor when this happened, right?
Correct.
What did he do, if anything, about the case?
Nothing. Early on, I always understood this was a difference of legal interpretation. It took a while for me to realize it had nothing to do with legal or the legalities. It was just all politics. So I had sent a petition to Scott, but he was in an election for the Senate and he just ignored it. And
So once again, politics rears its ugly head.
it did.
Yeah.
I've seen it on multiple occasions. When Scott left and when Ron DeSantis campaigned for the job, I met with him at a rally or at a fundraiser, and we
Yeah.
talked about the case, and he agreed with me. The case needs to be moved.
Yeah, he even gave you his cell phone number, right?
I still have it.
Yeah. Does
That
it
number
work?
changed. No, that number changed. That
So,
changed not by election night.
did he ever do anything?
What happened was he told me at the time, and my memory's pretty good, and it's
Yeah.
in the book. He told me at the time, I explained what was going on, and they just weren't doing their job. And he
Yeah.
said, when local government fails to do their job, the governor has both the authority and the obligation to act. And he agreed with me. The case is just stuck in the 20th Judicial Circuit.
Oh,
All I've ever asked, move it to a different district and let an objective, honest, objective state attorney or special prosecutor, somebody do an honest, objective review, and then let's see what happens. And Fox has refused to release the case because she knows someone else is going to look at it, indict it, and it's going to make her look like the hack she is. DeSantis has a petition on his desk, but for years, I've gotten no response. He's had one for 3.5 years. I've submitted another one with additional evidence. He refuses to comment. If you go to his staff, journalists have done this and said, what's the status on the petition? All they will ever say is it's under review. And it's been there for 3.5 years.
yeah. It's a long review.
Keep in mind, Rick Scott took a position that offended the NRA. I think it was on bump stocks. And because of that, the NRA withdrew an endorsement for him or didn't endorse him. And it cost Rick, from what I understand, an additional $10 million out of his own pocket for his campaign for the Senate. Now, he's got the money. Someone like Ron DeSantis apparently does not want to run afoul of the NRA. And he doesn't want to alienate a strong Republican like the Lee County area. So he's just been quiet about it. Now, it's interesting. Amira Fox has let several murders go. She tanked a grand jury against a murder. One of the jurors was so offended, they spoke with the press. And the press warned her, the reporter warned her, you can be held in contempt and jailed. She said, I'm an 85-year-old woman. What are they going to do to me? So she spoke out. The reporter, John Hackworth, wrote a column about this, and it got a Pulitzer Prize because Amira Fox had tanked a murder grand jury because she wanted to get rid of it. She didn't want to take the case. It was about a prisoner. He was in a room alone with 3 guards, and he died. He was beaten and died. And the jury wanted to indict. Amira didn't want the case, so she told them not to indict. And one of the jurors was incensed. So Amira's got a long list of this sort of thing, but DeSantis hasn't done anything. Now, if you look instead at Andrew Warren was the elected state attorney in Hillsborough County. And he happened to just say out loud that he might not enforce some of DeSantis' anti-abortion laws.
Okay.
And just for speaking that out loud as a possibility, there's no case on the table, but just for speaking out loud, not willing to enforce some of DeSantis' new laws, DeSantis had him removed as state attorney. That just happened this summer.
Wow. Okay.
So if you're a Democrat and there's a slight infraction or something you disagree with, Ron DeSantis will take action. But if you're an elected Republican, there's some others involved. They're in the book. If you're an elected Republican, he's more than happy to ignore it.
Okay. Now, in the book, you recount how this guy Taylor, the guy that did the murder, how he's targeting you. What's going on with that?
He's just a sociopath. He's actually proud of himself. What happened was we filed a wrongful death suit.
Yeah.
Which is civil rather than criminal. So it's a lower standard. The idea was Taylor didn't have any money. And so I wasn't looking for money. What I was looking for was an opportunity to have my attorneys depose him.
Okay.
You have 2 years to file it. And we did. We filed just about the last month of the 2-year period. I really had no interest in filing it years ago. I just had to. Mm-hmm. And then you've got 90 days before you have to actually release it, 60 or 90. And we waited till the very end and then released it. Mm-hmm. And there was, in fact, process going back on a civil trial. On a civil process, civil suit. The murderer felt that he was inconvenienced by this. He couldn't believe somebody would force him to defend himself, and he started sending me threatening texts.
Okay.
Some of them are listed in the book. There are lots of them. I just included a few.
Yeah, I saw some of them, but they were pretty nasty. So what's your next step now, Sandy?
There are 2 things. First of all, I wrote the book to tell the story.
Yeah.
because it gets a lot of cloudy stuff. Amira Fox, for several years during her election, or for a year during her election, claimed it was a burglary and a Marine stepped in to defend his family
Yeah, I saw.
in his living room.
Yeah.
So it's burglary in his living room. The Marine stopped it. It really was. It never was in the house. And the guy spent 2 years in the Army 30 years ago, and there was
Right.
nothing going on in the house. The crime actually occurred over 100 yards from the house.
Right.
Now, there's something in Florida called a final report.
Okay.
The state attorneys are our DAs. When a DA has an assistant DA closes out a case, they write a final report, basically summarizing the case.
Okay.
One of the most important things in the case is location.
Okay.
Certainly in the stand your ground it is. The final report that Amira's chosen state attorney, the final report that he wrote, omitted location.
Really?
Just didn't fit the narrative. If you want to say there's a Marine defending against the burglar in the living room, you can't say, so 100 yards from his house, that's where he shot him.
Yeah, and it wasn't even a Marine.
No, not that it matters, but
I mean, not that it matters, absolutely, but
it's the accuracy. There was no burglary. The police knew it by the second or third day. They had all the facts and they knew there was no burglary. She was still on tape. She's on record at an event when her opponent said, "Why haven't you prosecuted the murder?" She is on record a year later at a political debate on tape saying it was a burglary.
Yeah.
And
what has all this done to you over these years?
I think you know the answer to that. It defies the natural order. Parents aren't supposed to bury children. It takes a toll on you. And if you don't think so, you're fooling yourself. It takes a toll, and you have to recognize that. Now, I spent 35 years raising a family.
Yeah.
And in 14 months, I lost 2 out of 3. I'd lost my wife the previous year very suddenly. And
that's a shame.
Well, you know what? The silver lining there is, as much as I went through my entire life with a partner, and as much as we faced all issues together,
Sure.
I'm really glad she didn't have to see this.
Yeah.
So that's the trade-off.
Yeah.
But it takes a toll on you physically, medically. It just does.
You spent a ton of time and effort and probably money fighting this case, right?
I have.
Yeah.
I have.
Going to quit?
No, Bob. If you look at it was a funny interview. I did a press conference a year and a half ago with Ben Crump down in Fort Myers.
Uh-huh.
And when the conference was over, they asked him, "If this doesn't work, are you done?" And he looked at them and smiled. He said, "You just heard my client speak. What about his comments gave you the indication or gave you the idea that he would ever quit?" And I won't.
What do you intend to do? You're fighting a corrupt political system, it sounds, and what can you do? What else can you do?
There are 2 things. First of all, once I realized the problem wasn't legal, I really didn't need an attorney. I had great representation with Mark O'Meara. I had great representation with Ben Crump. And I consider him to be a friend. I think he does a great job at a lot of things. And I enjoyed working with him. And I felt it was a privilege. So now, once I realized it wasn't a legal issue, I didn't need attorneys. It turns out it's a political issue, which means I need publicity.
Yeah.
So I wrote the book to tell the story and to straighten the facts out
Okay.
and to gain publicity. Additionally, I have been approached. There's an interest in making this story into a movie.
It sounds like it should be. And folks, the name of the book is Murder and Corruption in Florida. And the author is Sandy Modell. And this is a story about his son who was murdered. The case has not been tried. The perpetrator has not been charged. And it's all wrapped up in Florida's political system, which in this area appears to be pretty corrupt. So I can tell you this, I read the book last night, and Sandy does a great job of putting this all into perspective. It's well written, and you need to take a look at it if you have a chance. You really do. Where can people find it, Sandy?
It's on Amazon. There's an ebook, as well as it's available in an ebook form, as well as in a paperback version.
Okay. Is there anything else you'd like to add, my friend?
For those people that say you'll never give up, but
Yeah.
how do you justify that? And the answer is very simple. There's no statute of limitations on murder.
Yeah.
So at some point, I'm going to find an honest politician, either in Fort Myers or in Tallahassee, or I'm going to find a politician that finds it practical, because people like you provide me with enough of a voice and enough publicity that they get the pressure that they make a choice. Right now, Ron DeSantis has chosen between the NRA and me. He's chosen between Amira Fox and me, and it's an easy discard. I
Sure.
get that. But if there's a focus on this, if there's enough attention to it from people like you, then what happens, the calculus changes. He now has to choose between taking care of Amira Fox, protecting her, or the NRA, and actually worrying about how much this is going to hit him. Once that changes, I think it'll be an easy decision for him. And with either book sales, with publicity granted by people such as you, with the likelihood of a movie, and if that comes out during his presidential run, I don't think it's favorable. I think all those things go into the pot and make it likely that at some point DeSantis or somebody else is going to do the right thing, and they're going to take a murderer and charge him. All we've ever said is, I want an honest, objective review of the case, and then let's see what happens. I believe it'll result in an indictment. I believe, in fact, the testimony provided in the deposition for the civil suit is a virtual confession. And I believe trying and convicting the case will be a lot simpler than having gotten it to a new judicial circuit and an indictment. So once that happens, I believe at some point, some politician down in Fort Myers or up in Tallahassee will do the right thing, and they will indict or move the case. I believe the murderer will be indicted and will be convicted, and he'll be put in prison where he belongs. And until that happens, I'll keep working.
This is a father fighting for his son, and he's not going to quit. You can tell that. Sandy, thank you for being with us on Lean to the Left. I really appreciate it, and I hope that we can help shed some light on this story for you.
Bob, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me on.